Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be showing you a great method of painting a Space Wolves Grey Hunter for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. Now we thought it'd be fun in this video to paint him in the colour scheme of a particular great company, and we've chosen the Champions of Fenris. So this is Logan Grimnar's very own great company. Really nice colour scheme for this one, but it's worth noting that all the methods and techniques we're going to show you here can be applied to any great company you might want to paint, and indeed any rank of Space Wolf you want to paint. So whether you're painting Bloodclaws or Wolfguard, this is the video for you. We hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. When it comes to painting Space Wolves, it's always good to start out from an undercoat colour that's going to provide a great basis for all the different tones on the miniature. And I find for this colour scheme, going for a medium grey works really, really well for this. So I've chosen standard grey from the Colour Forge, but any grey kind of like this will be absolutely fine. And what we should do is start out with the main colour, which is that bluish grey that coats for most of their armour. So in this case, I picked out some wolf grey for this, and to apply it, all you need is a rough base coating brush. So I'm going to use a medium base coat brush here from Citadel. With this, all you need to do is make sure you thin that paint down with that touch of water to make sure it's nice and smooth and won't leave any brush marks, and then it's just a matter of painting all the armour with this colour. Now, don't worry about any smaller details as you go along, because we will clean things up as we add further base coats onto the miniature, so for now, just concentrate on the main body of the power armour. With that initial base coat now applied, we can begin the process of painting in some smaller base coats, and what we're looking for at the moment is to apply all the ones that can share the same colour wash, which initially is going to be a dark brown wash. Now the colour we can do now is going to be the base coat colour for the pack marking that appears on the Space Marine's right shoulder guard, and the colours you go for here will vary depending on what sort of squad you're doing. For my example here, as I'm doing a grey hunter, we're looking at red and black, and out of the two you should choose the colour that's weaker. So in this case red is going to be weaker than black, so we should start there. But likewise, if you're doing something like Bloodclaws where you're looking at red and yellow, in that case yellow is the weaker of the two, so you should start out with yellow. But for our example we want red, so I'm going to be using some Sanguine Scarlet for this, and to apply it I just want a medium sized brush. So here I've got a size 1 from Artisopus. It's about the same sort of size as a medium layer brush from Citadel, and that's the ideal sort of thing that we need here. With this brush, make sure you thin that paint down so it's nice and smooth and ready on your palette, and then it's time to start blocking in this shoulder. So in the case of our example here, we're looking at this one right here, and all we need to do is base coat it entirely, just being careful of the trim when we reach it. Now that we have the first of those smaller details blocked in, we can carry on applying a few more. And so the next one can be gold. Here I'm going to go for some Dragon's Gold, so a nice rich gold here. And once that's done, we can move on to base coating the leather. Here you want a darker warmish brown, so I'm going to use some Scabbard Brown in this case. And then finally what we can do is pick out any small details of bone. Now for our example here, there's going to be some wolf's teeth. And here we want a darker bone colour, so I'm going to use some Dragon Fang for this. But we'll start out with the gold, so here I'm using some Dragon's Gold, and to apply this one I've switched to a slightly smaller brush. This one's a size 0 here, but really you want any sort of small to medium brush that holds a good point, just with some accuracy as you block this in, because we're looking for any sort of decorations we can find on the armour of the miniature. And the main one is going to be on the breastplate. We've got this wing design just here, so we want to neatly block this in, being careful of that surrounding blue armour as we go along. But depending on your Space Wolf, you might have a few other bits and pieces to pick out gold too, such as the case here, where we've got this little housing for a gem down here. So I'm just going to pick this out at this stage as well. Next up, it's time to start base coating any leather details on the miniature. So here I'm using some Scabbard Brown applied again with the size 0 brush. And we're looking for any pouches, any pistol holsters. We've got his belt to do as well. And in addition, with Space Wolves, you'll often get these thinner bits of leather too on these little straps, such as the one down here in his legs. So be sure to get this at this stage too. And then finally, it's time to pick out any bone details with a darker bone colour. So here I've got some Dragon Fang, and for our example here, what we're looking at are wolf teeth that are just held around as trinkets, such as this one right here. And now that's done, we can move on to applying that wash onto the miniature. And as I mentioned, what we want here is a dark brown wash. So I'm going to be using some Battlewood wash, And to apply it onto Space Marine Primaris armor, I find it's actually best to start painting it into panel lines rather than washing it all over, because the cleanup can take quite a while if you do it that latter way. So to do this, I'm going to be using a small brush. What I've got is a size 00 here from Artisopus, which is around about the same size as a small airbrush from Citadel. Basically, any sort of smaller brush like this that holds a good point is ideal for it. And with it, what you need to do is just load up some onto your brush there like that, making sure not to overdo it, so you keep that good point on the bristles. And then we need to start painting this into all the recessed panel lines on the miniature. So, for example, if we take a look around the helmet, that means painting into things such as the eyes around here, just washing it into that recess, and then into the recessed parts that we've got going down the side, the faceplate, and around these pipes just here. And then we've got the mouthpiece, we just run it into that thing just there. We've got these little rivets that appear on the forehead, so we can run it into the corners around those too, so around there like that. And on the top of the vent, we can run it into the recesses on this as well. So it's basically this process across all the armor on the red as well. But when it comes to some of the other colors, such as the gold and the leather, in this case, just wash it straight over the top. So for example, on the design here in the chest, you can see just run it over so it settles in the recessed detail in that texture there. And here we have our Grey Hunter with that wash applied. You can see it really brings out all the definition there of the armour, and I have given it a quick once over just to make sure any little splashes have been cleaned up. And with that done, we can now move on to applying some more base coats that this time are going to be sharing a black wash. Now the first of these is going to be the silver detail, and here what you want is a good strong silver. So I'm going to use some Surcoat silver for this. Then for some black details, we want an off black that we can shade down with that black wash in a moment. So here I'm going to use some Death Reaper. But first of all, for the silver, we need some Surcoat silver, and to apply it, I'm going for my size 0 brush here once again, and this is going to be for all the silver details on the model, on the weaponry, also on the vents and all those little details like that. So in some cases, you might want to switch to a smaller brush for a bit more control. The choice really is yours, but as usual, once you've got the paint thinned down and ready, it's just a matter of looking for all these features, such as on his bolter just here, where we want to paint things such as the barrel just around here. And then with that done, we can then move on to base coating in the black detail with an off black. So here I'm using some Death Reaper applied again with a size 0 brush, and this will be for things such as the casings on the weaponry, like in the bolter just here. Also, we want to get the joints in the armor, such as on the back of the leg around about here. Now, one black detail I'm not going to paint at this stage is going to be the inside of this shoulder pad for the chapter badge of the Champions of Fenris. I'm going to come back to that later on with a deeper black, just to help that stand out against these black details here. And now that's done, we can move on to applying the second wash on the miniature, and this time it needs to be a black wash over the top of the silver and the black that we've just done. So here I'm going to be using some Oblivion black wash, and for the most part I'm going to be using the size 0 brush to apply this one, but you might want to have a smaller brush on hand for when you're doing some of the joints in the armour, where it's a little bit more intricate and you want a bit more control. But for a brush like this sort of size is ideal for most of it, because what we need to do is paint this directly over the top of both colours. So for example, on the bolter, you can see around the muzzle just here, it's just a matter of washing it directly over the top, just being careful whenever we encounter some of those colours that we painted earlier on. And with that wash completely dry, you can see it embeds those colours nicely in with the rest of the miniature too. So we can now move on to applying one more base coat on the model, and this is to do the shoulder where the chapter badge is going to be. Now at Space Wolves, this changes based upon what great company they are, but as I mentioned in the intro, what I'm doing here is the Champions of Fenris, which means here what we need is a pitch black. I'm going to use some Doom Death black for this, and to apply it I'm going to stick with my size 0 brush, and this is just going to be a neat base coat on this area. So as usual, make sure the paint's thinned down and under control on your brush, and then it's time to start blocking this in. And what we're looking at is this shoulder plate just here that we just want to base coat as neatly as possible, just being careful of the trim as we go. And now that's done, the shoulder pad is ready for the chapter badge later on, but before we do that, it's time to move on to highlighting the miniature. Now when it comes to hardened model, this is entirely optional and you certainly don't have to do it. And in fact, if you don't want to do it, what I recommend you do now is skip ahead in this video to when we start painting in smaller details, such as the pack markings and things like that. But if you do want your model to really stand out on the tabletop, then highlighting will do it. So what we're going to do is show you how to highlight every colour in case you decide you want to do so. And the first of those should be the most important one, which is the main colour for the power armour. And here what we need is a lighter shade of a bluish grey than we originally used. Now in this case I'm going to be using some Gravestone Blue, and to apply it what you now need is the finest brush you've got. So in this case I've gone down to a size 00 here from Artisopus, which as I mentioned earlier is about the same sort of size as a small airbrush from Citadel, but really just needs to be a small brush that holds a good point on it. And with it, what you need to do is just thin the paint down so it's just a little bit runny, not super watery, but nice and smooth so it flows easily from your brush. Then remove the excess paint off your brush and just load up a small amount fresh, so this way your brush isn't overloaded and it retains that fine point there on the bristles. And then with this, it's time to start looking for all the edges and angles that appear on the armour and gently pick them out. So for example, if we take a look towards the head, we've got the gorget at the front just here, and this stands out quite a bit. So what we can do is use the side of the brush and just skim along very gently like this. And the result is we get a line of that light colour catching the edge, and it highlights it really nicely and really easily. Now when you're doing this sort of thing, what you need to do is just keep changing the angle of the miniature to make sure that you're comfortable and so that you can access those edges with the side of the brush like this. Same is going to be true on top of the helmet. You can see just going around that vent there like that. But because of the nature of the shapes in these suits of armours, you won't always be able to access a detail like this, in which case it's time to use the tip of the brush. This requires just a bit more control. What you need to do is just brace your hands to be as steady as possible. So for example, on the helmet, if we go to the brow just here, just angle the model so you're really comfortable and painting in a downward motion, and with the tip of the brush, just follow that edge all the way along as neatly as you can. With that highlight applied, you can see the model undergoes quite a transformation and that it really neatens up all of that armour. And if you want to, you can leave it here, but you can also take it a little bit further, which is something that works very well for characters and things. This is just to add a finer highlight, just to help these edges pop a little bit more. And to do this, we want to mix up a lighter colour than what we just used. So for this sort of thing with Space Wolves, what I like to do is use that highlight colour. So in this case, it's going to be Gravestone Blue, but now introduce a lighter bone colour to it. So here I'm going to use some Vampire Fang. So what we need to do is make that mix on the palette, and to do so, I'm using my size 00 brush still. So you need to get some of each colour, so a little brushful there of the blue, and then mix in some of the bone colour and get a lighter tone there like that. Now you don't need very much of this, but you do need to make sure it is nicely thinned down, so it's really quite translucent there on the palette and under control on your brush. And then with this, we're just looking for the sharpest features that really stand out. We just want to accentuate them just with a little bit of this colour. So for example, on the helmet, it's going to be things such as the front of the vent, where we can just skim across there just a tiny bit, and just a little bit going around the sides here. So you see I'm just really aiming it around the corner where these highlights come together. Same on this side just here. Then also areas such as the brow, where again we can just very carefully go in and just get a little flick on this part here. Also the top of the mouth. So any details like this that really stand out, just add a tiny bit of this colour to help them pop. And now that's done, that greyish blue armour is complete, so it's time to start highlighting the smaller details. And what we'll do is start out with metallics, beginning with the gold. Here we want a very pale kind of white gold, so I'm going to use glistening gold here, and then for the silver we should go for a bright silver, so in this case I'm using mithril blade. Now once that's done, we can then highlight all the black details at the same time, and here we want a dark grey. So I'm going to use Dungeon Stone Grey, and then finally we can highlight all the leather, and in this case I'm going to go for some Bootstrap Brown. But first of all, what we need to do is highlight the gold. So here I'm using some glistening gold, and to apply it I'm sticking to the small brush, so the size 00 again, because the highlighting is very much the same sort of thing now as what we did on that bluish grey armour earlier on, where we're looking for all the edges and corners and just want to emphasise them with this colour. So once you've got it thinned and under control on your brush, we can start looking to do that. And so for example, on the chest we have this wing design here, so what we want to do is look for the parts that stand out, which on the skull in the middle are going to be around the eyes, so just around the sockets just there, a little bit on the nose, and also on the top of its forehead just there. Now when it comes to the wings, in this case we want to get the top of the pinions, so that's going to be just a highlight that follows that curve just there, and then very carefully picks out the top of it, just gently going down there like that. And then we want to pick out the actual wings themselves, and for this what we can do is just make sure there's not much paint in the brush, just angle the model like this, and just very gently skim along them just to pick out the edges very, very gently. Now that we've got the gold complete, we can move on to the silver, and here it's going to be the same sort of technique with a bright silver. So I've got some mithril blade, again being applied with a size 00 brush, and just like with the gold, look for all the sharpest edges and corners. Next we need a dark grey to highlight all the black details, so here I'm using Dungeon Stone Grey, and when it comes to the weaponry, this is going to be an edge highlight just like we did on the armour, looking for those edges and corners. And on the joints in the armour we're looking at the raised up ridges, so you can see the texture we've got just in here. All we need to do is just very carefully angle the model so we're comfortable, go with the tip of the brush and just pick out a few of the raised ridges around here. And finally, we need a brown to highlight the leather. So here I'm using some Bootstrap Brown, and whilst this is going to be an edge highlight again, this time I am just going to be purposely a little bit rough with it, just to create the impression of texture on the leather. And now that's done, the vast majority of the miniature is highlighted, and it's just time to move into some smaller details. And the first of these is going to be to highlight the bone parts, which in the case of our miniature here are basically those wolf's teeth that we got around that leather cord on the leg. Now for this we want a medium coloured bone tone here, so what I'm going to be using is some Skeleton Legion. Then we need a lighter shade to finish it off for a highlight, so here I'm going to use Vampire Fang. We'll start out with Skeleton Legion, and to apply it I'm definitely going for the small brush again, so it's the size 00 because this detail is pretty small. You don't need very much of this paint really, but you do need to make sure it's thinned down, and then when you apply it, it's just a matter of painting it on in lines going in the direction of the tooth. So for example on this one here, I just want to paint some lines going down towards the tip. And then to finish these off, you're ready to move on to a lighter bone shade. So here I've got some Vampire Fang, and it's just a matter of applying a small amount towards the very tip. And now that's finished, the next detail to paint in is going to be the pack marking that appears on that shoulder plate just here. And in this case, what we're going to be doing is a little bit of freehanding. And when it comes to this sort of thing, what I really recommend you do is look for a relatively simple pattern that's going to be easy to replicate across your whole squad. So for this sort of thing, what I like to do is triangular designs. And remember, we have already set up the shoulder pad with the weaker of the two colours that appear here, which in our case is red. And so now all we need to do is paint black over the top. But no matter what the secondary colour is, you can still do it in the same sort of way. In this case, I'm using a pitch black, so I've got some Doom Death black, and to apply it, I'm sticking with my size 00 brush. And what we need to do is prepare this for the freehanding technique by thinning it down so it's quite inky. And the key thing here is just to make sure that it flows really easily from the brush as we apply it. So it goes where we want it to go, essentially. So I'm just going to water the paint down up to about that sort of consistency just there. You can see quite inky, and then move excess paint off your brush, load up fresh so that you don't have loads on there, and then make sure that you got that good fine point on the bristles. So for this sort of thing, what I'm going to do is two triangles coming in horizontally from the back of the shoulder plate moving across towards the front. And so to do this sort of thing, I like to start with a central line, painting it in with a vertical line like this. So you can see I'm angling the miniature to make sure I'm painting this downward motion, because this way it's a nice natural motion to get a straight line there like that. And what we want to do is go all the way to the back, just going parallel to the bottom of the shoulder plate. So back to around about there. Just bringing it around to where we want the point of the triangle to be, which is going to be around about that point just there. Now from here we can start to widen it out. We want to be quite shallow when it comes to the lines going out from either side of that point. So you can see I'm just going a little bit on there, just gradually widening it out, aiming to reach that bottom corner of the shoulder plate. So just aiming to roughly bring it down to about there. So there we go. And then we can replicate that on the other side by just changing the angle once again and just starting to widen it out on this side. So just there. So you can see this is basically a fairly delicate process of just setting up the pattern. Remember, if any mistakes do happen, you can always jump back to the previous colour. So in our case, that will be some Sanguine Scarlet just to clean it up. But from this point on, we now have the basis of the pattern appearing, so we can move up the shoulder and do the second triangle that's going to be a little bit higher up. So we're looking at around about here for this one, I think. And again, it's the same process. Stay roughly parallel with the bottom of the shoulder plate, bring it around to roughly the same point that we've got the other one, so around to about there, and then start widening it out from here by just gradually going outwards like this, heading back towards meeting the other triangle down there. Now, once you're happy with this initial pattern, it's then just a matter of colouring it in. So just take your time, block it all in, and then you're ready to move on to the next step. And here we have the completed pack marking. Now, as I mentioned, this one's a relatively simple one because it's quite easy to lay it out. And I always recommend that you go for patterns like this because of that reason, because what you need to do now is replicate it across your squad. But if it's nice and easy to block in, you'll soon get into a rhythm and it'll be done before you know it. Now, the next thing that we're going to paint in are the eye lenses. And here we're going to go for a glowing red effect. So to do this, we need to start out with a pure white. I'm going to use some White Star here, and then we need to wash a thin red over the top. Now, I'm going to use some red glaze here, but if you don't have access to this, then Blood Angel's Red from Citadel is a great alternative. Whatever you choose though, you need to start out with a white. So here I'm using White Star, and to apply it you definitely want to stick to your small brush because we are of course painting the eye lenses now, so quite small details. Now at this stage the eye lens should be relatively dark from that wash that we put into it earlier on. Now if yours isn't quite as dark as ours, just run a bit more brown wash in there before you do this. But what you need to do with the white is make sure it's thinned down and a little bit inky like we had with the black a moment ago. And then we just need to paint a line directly in the middle of each eye lens. So remember to angle the model to make sure that you're comfortable, carefully move in, and then just paint that line directly down the center just there. Once that's done, you're then ready to move on to a thin red paint. So here I'm using some red glaze, but as I mentioned, you can use a red contrast paint if you want to. Just be sure to water it down a little bit if you do. And with this, you just need to run it into the entire recess area of the eye so that white shows through strongly in the center to give it a glowing effect. And there we are, the eye lenses are done too. So the next thing that we need to paint in is another detail that might or might not appear on your Space Wolf, but often you'll get these red sort of diamond-like gems on them. And for these, what we want to do is paint them red. So in this case, we do have one on the leg, and to paint it, we need to start out with a darker red. So here I'm going to use some Asmodeus red, and once that's on there, we should put a black wash over the top. So here I'm going back to some Oblivion black wash. But we'll start out with the base coat of Asmodeus red, and to apply it I'm still going for the size 00 brush because this detail is quite small. All you need is a small amount of this thinned down and ready, and then it's just a matter of blocking it in. And the gem in question is this one right down here. You can see we've got the little gem part of it in the center. Just need to neatly base coat this in at this stage. Once you finish the base coat, the next thing to do is paint a black wash over the top. So here I'm using Oblivion black wash, and you do need to be careful with this to make sure you don't swamp the detail here. So I am applying it using that size 00 brush once again. Now the wash is dry, we can finish off that gem, and to do this we want to jump up to a really bright red now, followed by a really bright orange. So what I'm going to go for is some Demon Red, followed by some Orange Flare. Now we'll start out with Demon Red, and to apply it I'm going for the 00 brush again, and here it's going to be basically edge highlighting, but because of the shape of this gem, really what we're looking at doing is just a cross, essentially going down the middle of it and across the center. So you just need to prepare the paint for that, making sure it's nice and thin, and then once you've got that brush on a nice point, we can start picking that area out. And so if we take a look at this one right here, it's just going to be a vertical line following the central part of it, so just very carefully going down there, and then we want to do one that goes horizontally across it as well. And then to complete the gem, it's time to move on to a bright orange. So here I've got some Orange Flare, and all you need to do is paint a tiny little cross in the very center of the gem, just around here. Now once this is done, it's then time to apply any transfers to the miniature. And as I mentioned, I'm going for the Champions of Fenris on the shoulder pad just here. But there's one more detail that we need to add once the transfer has been applied. So I'm going to go and do that now, and when we come back, we'll add that finishing touch to the miniature. And here we have the completed gem, and as I mentioned, I've also applied that transfer onto the shoulder plate. Now if you look at it straight on, you'll notice I've not actually put that wolf directly in the center, and that's because whilst the decals are very nice, they don't have that sort of yellow star symbol next to it, which is entirely optional if you want to put it on, which I thought would be cool to do on this model here. So that's why that wolf rampant is a little bit off center, just to make room for it. And if you want to add it, what you'll need is a good strong yellow. I'm going to use some darks and yellow for this, and to apply it, I'm going in with that size 00 brush once again, because here again we're just doing some freehanding, and essentially we're looking to paint in a cross, and then we just need to embellish it a little bit. So what you need to do is get your yellow thinned down just like we did with that black earlier on when we were doing the pack markings, and once it's prepared, move the excess paint, load up fresh so that you've got that fine point on your brush, and then what we need to do is paint a vertical line just in front of the wolf. So we're looking at around about here. What you need to do is just paint a line going straight down just there, just very gently applied, gradually building it up there like that. Now once you're happy with that, we can then start embellishing it to make it into that slightly more star-like design by turn the model on its side and going across it in the middle to create a cross-like shape. So just there, we just want to go straight down with another line there like that. From here, it's then just a matter of adding two more lines onto it. So one going across this way, going right through the center. So very gently just there. And then we can do one going on the other angle as well. So just down here. Now with this done, the miniature is then ready to be based. And as ever, it's entirely your choice what basing scheme you go for. But in this case, I'm going to be going for a snowy base. So painting the Space Wolves colour scheme is very straightforward and lots of fun, but it does have a few options in there based upon what grade company you're doing and also what kind of pack you're doing as well. Now when it comes to the pack markings, just remember to choose first of all the colour that's a little bit weaker. So for example, if you're doing Blood Claws, it's a good idea to base coat it with yellow. Then later on when it comes in time to do the freehand markings on top, just choose a fairly simple shape and just gradually do that initial line and then bulk it out from there. Aside from that, it's very straightforward painting these miniatures, so have fun and we'll see you again very soon.